So you know how people are always talking about how AI is this super expensive thing, like only these huge companies with tons of money can even mess with it. Well, what if I told you that you could recreate some of that cutting-edge AI tech,
Yeah.
like the stuff DeepSeek uses for just 30 bucks? Sound crazy,
It
right?
almost sounds too good to be true.
Right. But that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've got this super interesting GitHub README from Jiayi Pan, and it details this project they call TinyZero, which is all about recreating some of the core parts of DeepSeek's R1-Zero. And they did it without breaking the bank.
It's a really impressive project, especially if you're a developer. It shows that you don't necessarily need a giant budget to start working with some of these advanced AI concepts.
For sure. So let's break this down a bit. What exactly is TinyZero?
Well, at its heart, TinyZero is all about recreating the self-verification and search capabilities of DeepSeek's R1-Zero, but on a much smaller scale. It uses a 3 billion parameter language model, and it focuses on two main tasks: countdown and multiplication.
Countdown and multiplication. Those sound a bit more like grade school homework than cutting-edge AI.
I know, right? But they're actually really clever ways to test how well this model can learn and apply logic.
Okay, I'm listening.
So let's take countdown, for example. You know that game where you have to use numbers and arithmetic to hit a target number?
Yeah, I think I've seen that before.
So TinyZero starts off making random guesses. But the cool part is, it learns to self-correct.
Wait, so it's checking its own work and figuring out how to get closer to the answer.
Exactly. And it does all of this through reinforcement learning.
So it's not just blindly following some pre-programmed instructions. It's actually problem solving and learning as it goes.
Exactly. And that's one of the big takeaways for developers here. Even with a smaller model, you can still get some pretty amazing results using reinforcement learning.
That's wild, especially when you consider how cheap they managed to do this all for. Like, we're talking $30 here.
Right. Jiayi Pan actually shared on Twitter that the whole training process for TinyZero cost less than $30.
It's mind-blowing when you compare that to what companies like OpenAI spend. Millions, even billions of dollars. It makes you wonder if those massive budgets are really necessary.
I think TinyZero definitely challenges that assumption.
For sure. But I'm also curious about the whole process of building this. I mean, when I'm working on a project, scaling things up is almost never a smooth process. Did they just magically find the perfect model size right away?
Not at all, actually. They started with a much smaller model, 500 million parameters. With that one, it couldn't even guess correctly in the countdown game.
Ouch.
Yeah. So then they scaled up to 1.5 billion parameters, and that's when they started seeing some of that self-correction happening.
Interesting.
And then finally, they hit the sweet spot between 3 and 7 billion parameters. That's where the models could consistently solve the problem.
So it was all about finding that balance between model size and performance.
Exactly.
Which is a great lesson for any developer working with limited resources. And it actually makes me think about DeepSeek. You know, they bill themselves as this more affordable alternative to OpenAI. But with TinyZero being so cheap, it kind of makes you wonder about DeepSeek's claims.
That's a good point. Not everyone is totally convinced by DeepSeek.
Really?
Yeah, some experts have been raising concerns about how transparent they are about their costs.
Interesting.
Like, their training costs might be lower than OpenAI's.
Yeah.
But when you factor in all the other stuff, infrastructure, energy consumption, personnel, the actual operating costs could be way higher.
So there's some healthy skepticism there.
Definitely.
But regardless of DeepSeek's situation, TinyZero's success still has some huge implications for the whole field of AI.
Absolutely. I mean, if a small team can recreate some of the core parts of a sophisticated AI like this and do it on a shoestring budget, it really makes you wonder what the future holds for AI development.
No kidding. And that's a perfect segue into what this all means for developers. We're going to dive into all those implications right after the break.
So one of the coolest things about TinyZero is that the code base is publicly available on GitHub. Like, anyone can go check it out and even mess around with it.
So this isn't some top secret research project locked away in a lab. We're talking about something that's actually accessible to everyday developers.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But I gotta be honest, I'm not exactly an AI expert. Is it really that easy for someone like me to just dive into this code base and start building cool stuff?
Well, it definitely takes some effort, understanding how reinforcement learning works and how to train these models properly. It does require some expertise.
So is TinyZero more of just a cool research project then? Or is there a way to make this tech more usable for regular developers?
Oh, I definitely think there are ways to bridge that gap. For one thing, we're seeing a lot more resources and tutorials popping up about TinyZero and similar models. which is helping more developers learn the basics of reinforcement learning.
So it's kind of like learning a new programming language or framework.
Yeah.
Exactly. And on top of that, there are also a bunch of pre-trained models and toolkits becoming available that make it a lot easier to integrate TinyZero-like functionality into your own applications.
So you don't necessarily have to go through the whole training process yourself.
Right. And as this tech keeps developing, I think we'll see even more user-friendly interfaces for working with and training these models.
It's like how we've seen things evolve in other parts of software development.
Yeah.
We start with these complex, low-level tools, and then over time, we build higher-level abstractions that make the tech more accessible to everyone.
Exactly. And I think that's exactly what's happening in the world of AI right now, with projects like TinyZero paving the way.
That's super exciting. But I also want to go back to something we talked about earlier, about TinyZero focusing on those two tasks, countdown and multiplication.
Right.
I mean, they seem pretty basic on the surface, but I guess there's a lot more to it than that.
Oh, for sure. Like, take Countdown, for example. The fact that TinyZero can master that game shows that it could be really useful for things like automated code debugging. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Imagine an AI assistant that can analyze your code, find potential bugs, and even suggest fixes that are tailored to your specific coding style.
That would be a game changer.
Right.
No more pulling all-nighters trying to track down that one tiny error.
And then there's the way TinyZero uses the distributive property to solve multiplication problems. That same approach of breaking down complex tasks into smaller steps can be applied to a ton of different applications.
So it's not just about crunching numbers.
Nope. It's about applying that problem-solving approach to all sorts of challenges.
Like what kind of things?
Well, think about stuff like optimizing algorithms,
Right.
designing efficient systems, even creating smart opponents for games that can learn and adapt to the player.
Wow.
TinyZero's core capabilities could be applied to all of that.
And because it's so cheap to run,
It opens up those possibilities to a lot more developers.
right, it's not just limited to big companies with tons of money.
Exactly.
So we're talking about giving the power of AI to basically anyone who wants to use it. That's the idea.
That could lead to some incredible new innovations.
I think so.
And, that actually brings me back to DeepSeek and all that skepticism about their true costs.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think this friend of AI becoming more accessible
Like we're seeing with TinyZero.
could shake things up in the industry?
I think it definitely has the potential. If it keeps getting easier and cheaper to build powerful AI systems, it could
Right.
really disrupt the status quo.
So maybe DeepSeek's claims of being the budget-friendly option won't hold up for much longer?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think more competition in the AI space is a good thing. It'll push everyone to create better and more affordable solutions for developers.
I agree. So this isn't just about TinyZero itself. It's about the bigger picture of what it represents for the whole AI industry.
Exactly.
It's about opening up doors and empowering more developers to push the boundaries of what's possible.
And at the end of the day, TinyZero shows that you don't always need a ton of money to make a big impact in AI.
Sometimes it's about being clever and efficient.
Yeah.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into TinyZero. We've talked about what it is, what it can do, and what it means for the future of AI.
And hopefully we've inspired some of you listening to explore the incredible world of AI development.
Because the code base is out there,
Yeah.
just waiting for you to check it out. So what will you create with it? It's funny, as we've been talking about TinyZero and all this, I keep thinking about that quote. You know the one. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Oh, yeah. Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah, that's the one. And it just feels so fitting here. Like TinyZero really does feel kind of magical, the way it can do all this stuff with such limited resources.
Right. It really challenges our whole perception of what's possible with AI.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's what gets me so excited about this field. That sense of pushing the boundaries, like we're exploring some uncharted territory.
It really does feel like a new frontier.
It does. And as developers, we have this incredible opportunity to shape that future. Like we can be the pioneers, figuring out what's possible and how to use this tech to solve real problems.
And TinyZero is a perfect example of that. It shows that you don't need to be a giant company with unlimited resources to make a real impact.
Exactly. Innovation can come from anywhere.
And I think that's what's so important about this, having different perspectives and approaches. It's not just about building bigger models. It's about finding clever and efficient ways to solve real-world problems.
Right? It's like taking those simple tasks TinyZero does, countdown and multiplication,
Yeah.
and figuring out how to apply those principles to bigger challenges.
Exactly, like code debugging,
Yeah.
system optimization, even game development.
So many possibilities.
And with TinyZero being so accessible, more and more developers can start exploring those possibilities.
So for all you developers out there listening, remember that TinyZero's code is out there waiting for you. What are you going to create with it? What problem are you going to solve?
It's really exciting to think about.
It is. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into TinyZero. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We talked about what TinyZero is, how it works, and why it matters, especially for developers.
And hopefully we've inspired some of you to go check it out and start experimenting.
Because who knows, maybe the next big AI breakthrough will come from someone listening right now.
That would be awesome.
It would. So on that note, we'll wrap things up here. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into TinyZero. Until next time, happy coding, everyone.